Good morning, everybody. I'm going to ask you all to stand with us as we sing our opening song, Everlasting God.
We will wait upon the Lord, we will wait upon the Lord. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord, we will wait upon the Lord, we will wait upon the Lord. Our God, you reign forever. Our hope, our strong deliverer. You are the everlasting God. The everlasting God, you do not break, you are growing. You're not defended the weak. You comfort those in need. You lift us up on wings like eagles. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Strength will rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord.
You may be seated.
Good morning, Advent Project. So right now I'm just going to explain how we take off our shoes. As you can see, we're all over here barefooted, or you may see some cool socks. But we take these off in order to show some reverence to our Lord. We base this off of the example that Moses gave us when he took off his sandals in front of the burning bush to show that reverence to the Lord, that holy ground that he was stepping on. So that is just a little bit of what we do here. So now I'm going to ask you guys to take your Bibles and open it to Job 2, 9 through 10. To give you a little bit of context of what's going on, in the first two chapters, Satan asked God to test Job, who is a faithful servant, and said if he were to take his blessings away, he would, curse God. And I chose these verses because this is when his wife, he already lost his kids, his flock, his servant. He's lost everything, and he even has boils from his head to his feet. And this is what his wife says in verse 9. His wife said to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job replied, "You talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?" So in all of this, Job said nothing wrong. So this gave me a big lesson because sometimes we see bad things going on. And this whole book, when you take the time to read it, it really battles with that thought of why do good people get bad things, and why do the wicked not suffer, and all these questions that are very relevant in our present world. And it just reminds me that as long as we trust God, we don't have to understand the justice of this world. He will give us that at the time that he thinks that it's right for us to know. So with these thoughts in mind, as we continue with our journey and as we continue with our sermon series of journey through this life that we have, that we remember to trust God with everything. We're going to go ahead and do intentional moment of prayer. So you guys can sit, stand, or place yourself in anywhere that you would like as I pray. And we're going to have 2 minutes of silence, and then I'll finish it off. Take these 2 minutes to reflect and pray to God about your journey, about the good and bad that God sometimes allows for us to have. Lord, we are so unworthy of being in your presence, but you have somehow allowed us to just be here and spend this time with you. Lord, thank you so much for the Sabbath. Thank you because we can be here as a community, fellow believers or non-believers. Whatever it is, you have brought us here, and you have allowed us to just spend time in your presence, Lord. Right now, as we reflect about everything that you've given us, we thank you and we stand here in awe. Lord, help us to trust you. Help us to not try to understand everything, because we can go in circles just like Job and his friends did in this book. Thank you for giving us this wonderful book that we can reflect on these things and not to worry and just trust you and to accept the good and the bad. Lord, as we continue on with this Saturday and everything that you have in store for us, I ask that you help us clear our mind and open up our hearts so that we can take in whatever you need us to take in for today, and that we may use that, apply it, and share it with everyone we know. Thank you so much again, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Join us as we sing Good, Good Father.
I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable, I
this moment, I invite you all to stand as we sing our opening song, Who You Say I Am. Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but He brought me. Oh, His love for me. Oh, His love for me. Who the Son sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Free at last, He has ransomed. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, He died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
Good morning, everyone. A couple of months ago, I preached a sermon called We Are Barabbas, in which I mentioned that I was a pastor's daughter. Well, I have the honor and pleasure of introducing my dad, Chaplain Bankston, to Advent Project to share a message with you guys. So, Dad, if you could come up here.
Come, let me grab this one. Please be seated. I'll maybe explain a bit why the chair's up here, and it's more for my comfort than for yours. I got injured in Iraq in 2008, and sometimes it hurts to stand. So you may see me sitting some, you may see me walking, and that's just how I function. So the chair's for me, and if it's okay with you, I'd have it up here. Thank you, sweetheart. Would you bow your heads in a word of prayer? Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity to come here. It's been a long time since I have had the honor and privilege to speak within a Seventh-day Adventist church. Here I am, an ordained minister in the Adventist church, and haven't spoken in one in a long time. And part of that is me, and I'm just running and not really wanting to be up front because I'm an introvert. And yet here I am. So I pray, God, that you will just remain here as your presence is always here. That you will just continue to hover here as you did in the book of Genesis, and hover in our lives. Open our ears, our hearts, our minds, our very essence to connect with one another and to connect with you. May you touch us in ways that we need to be touched. May you prick us in ways that we need to be pricked. May you uplift us in ways that we need to be uplifted. When we leave this place, may we never leave your presence, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. I want to thank the sound team. Man, I was in tears. I don't know about you. They just sounded beautiful, didn't they? The work, I've been a pastor for many years in the past, and oftentimes people don't realize, sitting in the pews, the work that goes on behind the scenes to make something that looks so simple really happen. And the sound team are a part of that, out here practicing and preparing every day, not every day, but several days a week for this. So thank you guys. You sounded beautifully. I can't sing. If I did, you would go running. So we have wonderful people like them that have gifts that can do that. And I want to thank the sound team in the back, Sam and others, who are hidden back there behind a glass wall that are making my microphone work and the sound work and the video work that aren't often seen either, and the pastoral staff and the other volunteers that are here. I want to recognize you and thank you for being here as well. So thank you. I'm going to share a little bit of my journey with you today, of my life story, and I hope as I do that it will impact your life story. Because one thing that I firmly believe in as a Christian is that we're all on this big thing called a journey. And we're all on different journeys in different ways and going different places in different times, and yet we're on a journey. And sometimes my journey connects with your journey, and your journey connects with mine, and sometimes we miss each other. And that's okay. Timing is a part of that as well. So I'm going to share some of my journey with you. May share some tears, some laughter, some joy, believe it or not, maybe even a little frustration, and that's okay. So I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. Have anybody ever been to New Orleans? You're not missing a whole lot, but good food and good people, right? We do have the longest bridge in the world. So I often encourage people, get on the causeway, the longest bridge in the world, and cross it one day. Pay the $1.50, I think it's $1.50 now to cross it, and it's free to go back on the other side because you've already paid half the fee. You will not see one side of the city from the other. I think it's 26, 27 miles long. That's a long bridge. One thing that comes to my mind often as I cross that bridge is the sound, fa-foom, fa-foom. And if you've ever crossed it, you know that sound. And as you get closer to the city, you can see the Superdome, where at one time we had the greatest football team in the world, one year, and not so much anymore. And you can enter into the city of New Orleans. I hesitate sometimes with telling people that I'm from New Orleans because all kinds of presuppositions comes in when you tell someone where you're from, because all kinds of judgments and other things come in. So I was born in New Orleans. I was raised in Louisiana, and then from 1990, some of you weren't even born yet in 1990, I've lived all over the world. So that's a part of my culture. I grew up not a Christian. How many of you, if you're willing to share, grew up in your life not really a Christian? All right, so there's a couple in here that's willing to share that. Or maybe you grew up not understanding God or having a different understanding of God as well. So I grew up in a home where God was not mentioned, religion was not mentioned, the Bible was never brought up, so I don't have a lot of the embedded baggage that some people have that are good and bad when it comes to religion. I don't have that. I grew up with kind of a different understanding of God, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I grew up with a misunderstanding of God. Have you ever had that before in your journey? Some of you are like, well, I'm afraid to say that, Chaplain. I don't care if you call me Chaplain Myles, whatever. I'm afraid to say that because I'm in God's house and maybe God won't accept that. And I want to encourage you that God will accept you in more ways you probably fathom. So I grew up with a deep misunderstanding of God. And it was skewed from when I was very little. And I firmly believe in the devil. There is a devil out there, and I have met the devil through people, through situations, and through life. And the devil is alive and well, and guess what? Does not like you and does not like me. The Bible talks about the devil in different ways. It says he's a lion. That's kind of intimidating. I often think, and my wife's heard me share this, when I go to a zoo, I'm fascinated by lions, but I would not want to be in the pit with them. What about you? Would not want to fall over in the pit. Describes the devil as a liar, a thief, a murderer. Those are images of the devil that are very true. So when I grew up, my father was 27 years old. My mom was, I think, 27, 28 years old in New Orleans. And they came together through their life story that they didn't even fully understand and probably never did. My mom's father, my pawpaw, who I never knew, was a murderer, served in Angola prison, and had killed a sheriff and several other people, was half Native American, half Caucasian. My mom's mom, my mama, how many people say that? Mama and pawpaw, right? My mom's mom, mama, Turney, was an abusive, horrific individual who beat my mother because my mom was pretty. And my mom liked to wear makeup in the 50s, and my mama would see in my mom who she wasn't and would try to beat it out of her. So then my mom meets my father, and my father's father was murdered in a mental home. Tell me that's not irony. My father's sister was shot and murdered by her husband. My father's brother was killed through Cane Green, and my father's other brother was in a mental home. So, I mean, traumatic families seem to draw each other sometimes, don't they? So my mom and dad come together not fully understanding their past and their present, and they fall in love. And they had problems. I was telling my two daughters last night, a couple of the hardest things I've ever done is being married and having children. Because it's tough. Marriage is tough. Don't let anybody tell you it's not. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. My wife and I have been married a long time. And we have 3 great kids, and it's challenging. So I'll be the first to tell you that. And if you haven't moved into that, I encourage you one day it may be. So my mom and dad come together, and they fall in love, but my dad was an alcoholic. My mom came from this abusive lifestyle and kind of accepted things. My dad was an architect and could draw real well. And that was back then when they had to hand draw everything, not on AutoCAD. And his right hand was cut off from a meat grinder when he was looking at girls when he was a teenager, pushing meat into a grinder at a Winn-Dixie, and cut off his hand. So he had to learn how to draw with his left hand. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know what his drawings looked like because I never got to see any of them. And my dad, I think it was December 23rd, 1973. That's a long time ago. I was about 18 months old at that time, so you can figure out my age. My dad tells my mom that he wants to go shoot some pool, win some money for Christmas, and then he was going to go to Christmas and buy us a bunch of Christmas presents. So my dad goes out in New Orleans and shoots a lot of pool on the French Quarter and the Bourbon Street and the Canal Street, and then he crosses over into Metairie and Slidell, and he crosses the causeway, shoots more pool, drinks more money. I'm sorry, said that wrong. Drinks more money. Shoots more pool, drinks more alcohol. And if you know anything about alcohol, one thing it does to you, besides gives you liquid muscle and other things, it causes you to get sleepy. So my dad at 27 years old, a young man. Anybody in here 27, close to that? God bless you. You're beautiful people. Value your age. Value it because it goes by in the blink of an eye. My dad was 27. Gets on the causeway to start to come back home. And he had all kinds of money that he had won that night. I'm told he was good at pool. He'd put the pool stick on that little nub of a hand and shoot, and he would shove his money in pockets because he didn't have a wallet. He couldn't carry a wallet because he never figured out how to get it in his pockets right. Coming back across the causeway, that fa-foom, 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 heater going, cold outside, December 23rd, 1973, he starts getting sleepy. And I'm told, I wasn't there, I was a baby, that his truck went from one side of the bridge to the other and to the other, and eventually it hit one side of the bridge, and 27-year-old man shot out the windshield all the way into the cold, freezing waters of Lake Pontchartrain, December 23rd, 1973. So you can imagine at 18 months old, I didn't really know what a father was. I couldn't even say dada probably yet. The cops looked for my dad, and they couldn't find him, and it was my two uncles that found my dad after Christmas. Christmas has come and gone, so now it's December 27th, so 4 days he's been in the water. My mom had been living the false hope that Daddy was alive, that somehow he had amnesia and had swam because he was a good swimmer and was stuck down in the French quarters or somewhere, and they're going to find him. Well, her two brothers, my Uncle Shug and my Uncle Jimmy. My Uncle Shug was the sheriff of Tangipahoa Parish, where Britney Spears is from. So that's kind of funny. Way before she was born was he the sheriff. They got in a little 14-foot Cajun special boat, and that's a small boat if you know what boats are, with a little motor in the back. The divers couldn't find my dad. The cops couldn't find him, but my two uncles went out about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from shore. And they took a long, it's called a seine, a metal pole with a hook on the end of it. And they seined the bottom of Lake Pontchartrain. On the first drag, they caught something. Can you believe that? The first drag. And they pulled up something, and that something was my dad's body. Lifeless corpse. And they come home and tell my mom. And he had money, so he did what he said he did at home. I start my story there because my mom's life changed dramatically. All of a sudden, she's in New Orleans with an 18-month-old little boy and a 3-year-old daughter, a single mother in the early 70s. And back then, females didn't work a lot, if you remember the early 70s. She didn't know what to do with her life. She had life insurance. So she moved us outside of New Orleans, in another town called Amite, where she bought a small home. So I started at that young age wondering, if there was a God out there, how could God be so cruel? How could God be so cold and malicious as killing my father? I wonder if anybody in here today has ever wondered things about God, that maybe inside you've thought them, but you've not maybe articulated them. So I started having a misunderstanding of God, and no one there to help guide and direct me. About 5 years old, my mom gets a knock on the door from a door-to-door insurance salesman. I often say, is there any insurance salesman out there, but I won't do that today. And that man was going to become my new stepfather. Little did I know. And he convinced my mom to move to his town in Bogalusa, Louisiana, which is a stinky town where the paper mill's at, and start a life there with her. And I'm about 5 years old. We moved on about, 7-10 acres of land, and life seemed great. You know, it was like a fantasy at first, and everything seemed to be going well until one night that I remember, about 5.5 years old, I'm in my bedroom sleeping, and I hear my mom crying. You ever heard your parents cry? Wow, nobody. My kids see me cry all the time. Sometimes they're like, Dad, stop crying. I used to never cry. Now I cry all the time. I heard my mom crying, so I did what a 5-year-old would do. I ran to my mama. And I do say mama. I ran to my mama as fast as my little 5-year-old legs could take me, and I opened the door. The image is still there of my mom handcuffed to a bed. My stepdad on top of her with a cigarette, burning her. I mean, what do you do with that at 5 years old? I mean, at 5 years old, what do you do with that? What do? I run to my mama, and I try to protect her. I know 5-year-olds and sometimes teenagers think they're tough, but they're not as tough as you think you are at a young age. And my stepdad grabs me and picks me up by my little pajamas, and shakes me, and I won't say some of the vulgar, horrific things he said, and throws me. And I'm going to tell you, have you ever had an outer body experience? You hear about them, right? Now, looking back on my life now, God gave me, I believe, this outer body experience. I didn't understand it back then, and I'll talk about it. As I'm flying through the air, about to hit the wall, I literally saw my body outside of my body. Tell me that's not crazy. And as my body hit the floor, my stepdad said some horrific things, blah, 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 I'm going to kill you, and I went running. Looking back on it now, I feel that God took me out of my body to help me not absorb everything that was happening inside of me at 5 years old. There would have been no way physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally that I could have handled that at 5 years old. So I see that now, that God pulls me out, holds me, and says, you're not going to experience all this. I got you. I ran to my room, sat on my bed almost all night, thinking that night I'm going to die. I don't know if any of you have ever had experiences like that, but I had them constantly. And as I had them, the other side of that growing up, the misunderstanding was, God, you're so cruel. You killed my father, now you put the devil in my house. And I lived like that for years, and every morning I'd wake up and think, Mama's going to take me out of here. She's going to take my sister out of here and my stepbrother out of here. And what Mom would do would put her sweet, loving hand on my cheek and say, it's okay, baby doll. It's not as bad as you think. Believe it or not, I convinced myself of that for a while, that it wasn't as bad as I thought. About 13 years old, I did have one prayer, and that was either that the devil in my house, my stepdad, would be killed, or my mom would divorce him. And I remember it so vaguely and so vividly. I say vaguely, so vividly. My stepbrother and my sister and I are on the stairs, and my mom is gone, and my stepdad's on the phone with somebody. We think at first it's my mom. We found out it wasn't. It was another woman. And he's having an affair on my mom, so guess who could not wait to tell my mom? All three of us. Now, the amazing thing is, my mom never would leave my stepdad through all the traumatic, horrific things that he had did to us, to include burn our house down with us in it. But the moment she found out he was fooling around on her, she left him. So at 13, how many of you have ever been 13? I hope I got a raise of everybody's hands, right? You can raise your hands in God's house. Stuff starts happening to your body at 13, doesn't it? Some people call it puberty. Some people call it weirdness. Through different stages, and I don't want to pick on them. Some of them go to become an emu. Is that how you say emo? Dark stages, that would have been jazz, Some of them just start rebelling. Your body just starts transforming. Hair starts coming out where it didn't before. Your voice starts changing. I stopped playing with Star Wars, the real Star Wars back then, and G.I. Joe and all those cool things. And I started for the first time looking at girls, and girls started looking at me. I had an earring in my ear, and I had a mullet. You know what a mullet is back then? In the early 80s, that was the cool stuff. It's funny how transitions happen. The very clothes most people wear now were in style back then, and that's funny. So times change. I had this long blonde mullet in the back of my hair, and I thought I was the toughest thing since sliced bread. About 13 years old, when they finally divorced, I started having all these feelings and all this hurt and all this anger that I didn't even know what they were. I just knew I had something. I started fighting a lot. People started having problems. And me and a friend of mine, Rudy Brignac, and he has said I can use his name. He's still my friend today. Rudy was a good guy and still is. We're walking in my back area one day, and we had and I'll just say his first name, Henry James. He's currently still in prison. I'm told he's going to be released in the next year or two. Has one arm. Being a bad man. You don't want to meet this guy in the back alley. Lived behind us, and we didn't know what these things were, but we came up on these plants that were in the ground that looked kind of different than all the other plants, like they were purposely placed there out in the middle of nowhere. So we found that kind of interesting, so we picked some of them, brought them home to show my mama. And Mom, to this day, I don't know how she knew, but she knew exactly what that was, that it was Mary J. Wanna, Mary Jane. The stink, whatever you want to call it, it was marijuana. She took it from us, flushed it down the toilet, did what most parents would say, don't you ever go back there again. Well, let me tell you, having 3 kids of my own, that's probably the worst thing to tell them. Because the curiosity that kills the cat is going to cause them to go and do the very thing you told them not to do, whether you want to believe that or not. And you may never know it. So me and Rudy went back the next day. We picked this thing called marijuana. Didn't really know what it was. I was in junior high, Angie Junior High, that's no longer open there in my town. And we took it home, put it in a pan. Didn't know how to smoke it. Put it in the oven, turned the oven on, and then we smelt it, right? And we thought, wow, we've smoked marijuana. So went back to junior high and told all of our friends, and we were the laughing stock at school, and found out how to correctly smoke marijuana. And a day or two later, we figured it out. And I don't share this to glorify the life, but to share my journey and how I believe God was with me through all of that. We roll our first joint, and we smoke it there in my kitchen. And Rudy, who I still think is one of the greatest people in my life, and I get high. Rudy had good parents at that time. I did not. And I looked at Rudy and I said, this is the best thing in the world. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Because in that moment, I felt no pain. I felt no hurt. I felt no feelings. I felt joy and laughter and just numb. And Rudy said something very different. He said, I'm never doing this again. And he never did. So me and Rudy kind of parted ways in some of our friendship, and I started doing drugs hardcore. And I don't want to glorify that lifestyle, but I do mean hardcore. And went from marijuana to cocaine to ecstasy to LSD to all kinds of other stuff. And then one day at about 15, I get a knock on my door from Henry James, the one-armed man. And Henry James came with a pistol in his belt. You ever seen one of those before? Kind of scary. And he says, look, I know that what you've been doing on my property. If I find anything else missing, they'll never find you. And he walked away. Well, at that point, I realized Henry James meant what he said, and Myles was never going back on Henry James's property, even to walk around. So I had developed what I call an addiction at that time, and I started selling and dealing. At about 16 at this point, kind of the wild child, the rebellious one in our neighborhood, the punk, the thug, whatever you want to call it. I was never in a gang, but I ran with the wrong people. I broke in houses. I stole cars, did stuff you can't fathom. And you look at me now and think, no way. No way would you do that. You're too clean cut, right? About 16, I get a phone call from a lovely man. You know, Seventh-day Adventists, we think we're the only ones sometimes, don't we? That can share the gospel. And as a chaplain in the military, I'm going to tell you there's a lot of people sharing the gospel out there. There's a lot. Brother Russell Valentine, Southern Baptist minister in the Angie Baptist Church, doesn't know me, knows of me, but doesn't know me. Somehow gets my number, calls me one day and says, hey, Myles, you don't know me. I'm Russell Valentine. I'd like to invite you over to my house, and let's watch the Lakers and Celtics play. And let me tell you, this is when basketball was basketball, my biased opinion. Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, McHale, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you know, I mean, that was basketball to me, right? Those were the good days for me. You take what you want from that. So I thought, I'm not afraid of this man. I'm going to go watch basketball. And we're going to eat a pot roast, I think is what he was cooking. I go to his house. We never watched a basketball game. That's the irony. We ate dinner, and then he says, well, let me bring you to my office for a minute. Old pastor, right? Pastors can sometimes be slick, right? I'll take you to my office. And I'm thinking, all right. So we walked to his office, and I wasn't afraid of anybody, really. I wasn't, especially a man. I'm going to fight anybody, right? So I'm not intimidated by him. He brings me to my office. He sits me down, and he sits there in his nice chair, different than this, and he opens up the Bible. Wow. First time anybody had opened the Bible to me. First time, I'm 16, that someone had opened the gospel, the very life, the essence that we live through in some ways. The first time. One of the first men to show me compassion, by the way, and love. One of the first men that didn't want anything from me or demand anything from me. A true Christian. Didn't judge me for my long hair and my earring and my foul language and my smoking cigarettes. And he knew all of that. Never judged it. Never ridiculed me. And he opened the Bible. And he said, I just want to read something to you. And I didn't know what he was going to read. I didn't really know what the Bible was. I'd heard about it. He opened the Bible to a scripture verse that I'm sure everybody in this sanctuary has memorized and can quote, and I often wonder, do we really understand it? And he said, Myles, I just want to read you a verse because I believe God loves you. And he said, God loved you so much that he gave his only son, that if you believe in him, Myles, you can have everlasting life. And I sat there and didn't know what those things meant, but I felt something. Have you ever felt God before? The presence of God, the Spirit of God, the breath of God, the Ruach in Hebrew? I felt God. Didn't know what that meant. Before I knew it, he said, would you pray with me? I didn't know what prayer meant. And he said, just kneel with me here. And what he was doing was leading me to a sinner's prayer. I've done that for some of my children and with many others. And he led me into a sinner's prayer. And before I knew it, I was confessing sins that I could be in jail for today. And I was pouring my heart out to God. And I accepted Jesus Christ for the first time in my life at 16 that night. And my life was changed. I started listening to stuff called Christian music. Steve Camp was someone I listened to back then. He's an old Christian singer now. And I went home, and I already knew I wanted my mom in the kingdom of heaven. Because if there was something as a hell, I didn't want my mom there. I didn't know what I was doing. I found my dad's Bible. I still got it somewhere in the house. It's so old. It was in my mom's nightstand. I pull it out, and guess where I went? John 3:16. And I said, Mama, would you kneel with me here? Guess what she did? She kneeled with me. Mama, would you pray with me? I was mimicking in my journey what the preacher did with me. I did with my mama. Mama, would you confess your sins? And Mama was confessing her sins, and she accepted Jesus that night. And me and her both were eventually baptized in the Angie Southern Baptist Church. The story, unfortunately, doesn't end there, and I got about 7.5 minutes, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. 6 months or so had went by, and what the preacher didn't tell me, and I would tell all of you, he didn't encourage me, and I'm blaming him, and I really don't need to because I have to take my own ownership in that. I didn't know to read my Bible. I didn't know to do that. I didn't know to keep praying. I didn't know to hang out with other Christians. So I'm still hanging out with my same drug buddies, and I'm leading some of them to the Lord. I'm still going to the same parties and bars and places that I don't need to be because I want to lead people to God. And I wasn't reading my Bible, and one day I'm over at a friend's house named Mickey Williams. And Jordan, my son's not here. My son just met Mickey. We went to Louisiana, and his first impression was, that's a bad-looking guy. I said, well, that's Mickey. He's another guy you wouldn't want to be in an alley with. He kind of looks like one of those motorcycle, real rough guys, and drives a motorcycle. Mickey's dad's name was Ezra, son of a Pentecostal preacher. Ezra looked like ZZ Top. You guys know who ZZ Top is? Long red beards, long red hair. He was mistaken for a Sasquatch on the Bogachitta River running down. They had a photo of him carrying a tree, snapshot, Sasquatch sighted. That was Ezra Williams. That was not a Sasquatch. Ezra was a preacher's kid who was a drug addict and a druggie as well, a much older man. And me and Mickey were outside wrestling and playing WWF, Michael T.D. Jakes and, different wrestlers back then. And I, at that point, had thought, well, I haven't cursed, I haven't done drugs, I haven't been with other people, I haven't done drinking, I haven't done all these things. So the devil was already setting me up, right? You ever been there before where you think you're doing all the right things? You really aren't doing some of the right things, but that was me. So I'm at Mickey's, and we're wrestling, and I grab him, and I headbutt him. And I didn't mean to hurt him. I did not mean to hurt him, but I did. Well, Mickey runs in crying, and he's holding his head. I'm 16 and a half. Goes in and tells Ezra, I don't have a father. Till this day, I don't know what a father's like except for God. He goes in and tells Ezra, and Ezra comes out there and starts grabbing me like I'm a grown man, punching me, beating me up. And I know teenagers think they're tough, and I could fight. I never lost a fight in my life. But a 16-year-old beside a 30-something-year-old man's a different story. And the whole time he's punching me, I'm thinking, I'm a Christian. Christians don't fight. Lord, help me here. Poof, help me here. Poof, help me here. Well, eventually, the punching didn't stop, and he grabs that long mullet and starts smashing my face in his pickup truck. And I got a lip, what do they call it, a hair lip right here, that a piece of my lip stayed in his truck. Well, eventually I thought, if I don't fight back, this man's going to kill me in this yard. So I start fighting back, get a good few hits in, and run across the graveyard, because I lived across the graveyard. And I said, before the sun goes down, you're a dead man. And I fell back into the life of drugs and partying. About 18 years old, some people say you fall away from God. I don't really believe you ever fall away from God. I think you just go into a different lifestyle. And God's with you the entire time. It's just sometimes we're so encapsulated by that lifestyle, so covered up in the sin of it, that we can't feel or sense or see the presence of God. So at 18 years old, I didn't mention, I got kicked out of one high school for carrying a concealed weapon, put in another one. And I was not very smart in high school. You ever been there? Anybody willing to say that? Yeah, I was one of those people. I mean, I took all the basic classes. I took agriculture. I got a C- in agriculture. That says a lot, right? And I didn't take algebra. I took fundamentals of mathematics. And my kids would tell you, I've got a plaque in my house, and it's my high school transcript. It's all D's and F's with one C-, and that's agriculture. That was me in high school. I didn't care. Can't say I wasn't smart. I didn't care. So I always often say high school, I didn't graduate high school. They graduated me. And at 18, something inside of me, and I believe that something was God, was instilling in me that I need to do something to get out of here. That if I stay in Louisiana, that if I stay in this lifestyle, I'm going to go to jail and or I'm going to get killed. So I believe that was the presence of God speaking inside of me. I couldn't articulate that back then. So I did what most people want to do. I knew I wasn't going to ever go to college because I wasn't smart enough. I knew that I didn't want to stay in Louisiana, so I wanted to go in the military. And I wanted to go in what I call the finest branch of the military in the world, and I still say they are, the United States Marine Corps. Hurrah! Right? Semper Fi, devil dog. And some of you are like, what is that? Hoorah says a lot in the Marines. That's an entire dissertation right there to another Marine. You just shared with them your life story, and they shared it with you. So I go in to see my Marine Corps recruiter, Sergeant Luttrell. My mom doesn't go in with me, and I wish she kind of would have back then. And he says, well, Myles, he said, what would you want to do in the Marines? And I said, well, there's only one thing I know Marines want to do. I want to be like Rambo. You guys remember John Rambo, right? Funny thing was, he wasn't even a Marine. He was Army Special Forces. I didn't know that. I just thought that's what Marines do. They're John Rambo. He says, well, I got the job for you, son. 0311 Infantry. And that is a tough life. This was 1990, early 1990, and something was happening back then called Desert Storm, Desert Shield. So I go to boot camp in San Diego, California. I go to Marine Combat Training. I go to School of Infantry. And I end up in Hawaii. And from Hawaii, I end up in the desert in Iraq, cooling my water in a sock filled with urine to keep the water cold at night. It was in Desert Storm as a young man at 18 with a lot of anger and a lot of pain and a weapon in my hand. Not a good place to be. Come out of the Desert Storm, joined a unit called Stay Platoon, which is one of the sniper units there, and did that for about 18 months. Had a lot of anger, a lot of pain. Then I go to a club in Hawaii, and it's no longer open, a club called Rumors in Hawaii. So I'm living in Hawaii, I'm dating and seeing all these different people, and I thought, I've got about a year and a half left in Hawaii. I want to go out and meet all kinds of people before I leave Hawaii, because I'm going to go back to Louisiana. I'm never going to come back to Hawaii. The first night out in this club, I'm not drinking, and my wife is there, who wasn't drinking, and we see each other. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it, when you see the other and they see you? And I see in that club the most beautiful woman in the entire world, and she was from my world. Little bitty thing. She was a Pentecostal, converted Catholic, converted Pentecostal. I was a heathen. And she convinced me as we're dating to start going to this Pentecostal church. And it was different. You ever been to a Pentecostal church? Well, lovely people. It was not my thing. And we started going, and it just wasn't our thing. We eventually get married. And we end up getting this pamphlet in the mail. And I want to talk about this for a minute. God is amazing. God brings people, places, situations, and circumstances in our life that we don't fully fathom. We don't. And that may have happened 20 years ago, and it comes to fruition 20 years later. Some reap, some sow, some water. I mean, you just don't know when it's going to happen. We get a pamphlet in the mail. Can I borrow that real quick? And I'm going to give it back to you. This is not a pamphlet. It's his name tape. Thank you very much. It was just a small pamphlet. We're living in Kapolei, Hawaii, beautiful Hawaii. I'm out of the Marines. I'm working as a project coordinator and purchasing agent. My wife is works as administrator for the state of Hawaii. We're making pretty good money, have a beautiful home, have Jasmine, wonderful life so far. The problem was I'm drinking, I'm smoking. I think my wife was still smoking in, probably drinking a little bit with me, and we were going to Pentecostal church, and life wasn't that great maritally for us and emotionally and spiritually. And this pamphlet says if you go to these meetings, so many nights you get a free Bible. Free Bible. Now, some of you grew up wealthy. I grew up what we call, where I'm from, po. Not poor, it's a difference. Po. And I mean po. Standing in line for free cheese, free bread was part of my life. Having all my friends have nice clothes and name brand jeans, and I wore tough skins that had patches all over them and hand-me-downs. I was po. I was what you'd call white trash. So anything free, you go get it, because that's what my mama always told me. And if you ever see me in Costco, I'm standing in line for a free sample. Probably 3 times with 3 different shirts. That's just me. So I told my wife, let's go to these meetings. They're giving away something free. I don't care what it is, but it's free. And that was in Nuuanu, Hawaii. One of my mentors that I love. I lost him. Ron Halverson Sr. Anybody knew him? What a lovely man he was. He was my father figure. Held these meetings, and on the 3rd night, they're supposed to have the Bibles. I'm not listening to the meetings. I could care less. Never heard of the Adventist Church. In my mind, they're a cult at that point. And honestly, that's what a lot of people think of us. I'm out there. Let me tell you, that's what a lot of people think outside of this church. And I go to stand in line. I go to get my free Bible, and guess what? They ran out. They ran out. I said some very unnice things to the lady there who was just a volunteer. And my wife said, please, let's come back. We went back the 4th night, no Bible. The 5th night, no Bible. My wife and I debate over this. I think it was the 6th night. She said it was the 5th night. We'll go with the 6th night since I'm speaking. On the 6th night, we go there. On the 5th night, she said, if we go back one more night, you'll never have to go to church with me again. I'm like, boom, I'll go. On the 6th night, God touched me. You know that song, He Touched Me? Oh, He touched me. God touched me that night. It's like the heavens had parted and something happened. I was touched. And Halverson asked if anybody wants to accept Jesus Christ, you can stand. And before I know it, I'm standing, almost levitating. And guess who's standing with me? My wife. My brother-in-law, who was a crystal meth and Filipino drug person, and his fiancée, who is now his wife. We were standing, and we went to the front, and I accepted Jesus Christ that night. Became a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. Became who I am today because of a pamphlet and a free Bible, and many other things. Ended up in southwestern Keene, Texas. That's a whole other story in itself. That is a different little town, isn't it? Wow, is it different. Pastored all over the state of Texas. Senior pastor, the very church that your senior pastor used to be at in Killeen. Been a federal prison chaplain, ministering to people that you wouldn't want around you, I assure you. Been in the military. I often say that I'm a missionary amongst Gentiles. And I provide ministry to people that speak more foully than you could ever imagine sometimes. But they're honest. and they drink, and they do stuff that we don't want them to do, but they do. And God uses me to speak and to hear and to journey with them. And God uses you in ways that you don't fully understand to speak and journey and to minister to others. That's the beauty of God. I want to encourage you today, in my last second here, to follow God's journey in your life, whatever that journey is. At this time.
Stand with us as we sing our closing song, Christ is Enough.
Christ is my reward and all of my devotion. Now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy. Through every trial, my soul will sing, no turning back. I've been set free. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ, my all in all, the joy of my salvation. And this hope will never fail. Heaven is our home. Through every storm, my soul will sing, Jesus is here. To God be the glory. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need.
I have decided.
I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need.
Matthew 1:21 says that she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save. The Greek is sozo, pull people from where they are, from their sins. with every head bowed and every eye closed. Lord, I come here in closing today, and I wouldn't be the man I am without asking right here in your presence that if there's someone here today that wants to accept Jesus, and you want to be saved today, you want to be pulled from the life that you're in, and you want to be brought into this new life, I'm going to ask you to do something that may feel uncomfortable. I'm going to ask you to come forward here today. Let me pray for you and accept Jesus in your life. You know who you are. You know what you're going through. You know what you're struggling and wrestling with. And every head is bowed and every eye is closed and people are praying for you. I came for a free Bible, and I got so much more. What did you come for today? Who are you today? Is God calling on your heart right now in the presence of his people? If he is, would you come forward now so that I can pray with you? Lord, I pray for your presence right now, that you'll just pour yourself upon each person in here. You know who they are. You know what they're going through in ways that we can't fathom, what they're living with and living without. And today may be that day for them. You stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears his voice and they open the door, you will come in with them and sup with them. Is that you today? I pray today, God, that you'll bless each person here, that they may leave this place, but they may never leave your presence, that you will inspire them, that you will lead them, that you will continue to redeem them, cleanse them, and bless them, I pray. In Jesus' precious and holy name.